Hello everyone. This is How Big Is Your Universe? Channel. In this episode, we will explore what gravity is. This episode is recorded as an appendix to second episode, which is Theories of Everything in Yogacara Buddhism. This episode is also an option for the third episode, which is the definitive theory of consciousness. In this episode, extra dimensions, spacetime, and gravity in string theory will be discussed. We shall see that these concepts are directly related to consciousness, or conscious beings, where consciousness is a lot deeper and scope of conscious beings is much wider than what most people think. Many great thinkers, philosophers, and physicists are talking about consciousness. Some of them are building a theory from scratch. Some assume consciousness is the fundamental of reality. Some even try to build mathematical model of consciousness. But unfortunately, consciousness is not so simple and is a lot deeper than we can understand. Certainly, all these thoughts centered around a misconception that only human beings, or at the very most, animals are conscious. Many, almost all, of these thinkers have left out the vast universe we experience completely, except a few like Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about the sun being conscious. If we really want to understand what consciousness is and what conscious beings are, we have to learn what are documented in Yogacara Buddhism and together with string theory. That's where we need to understand extra dimensions, gravity, and space-time. In the second episode, we show the mapping of organizing principle of Yogacara Buddhism and the corresponding components in string theory. These components are like various chips on a computer motherboard where everyone is an integral part of reality. String theorists, without knowing these principles, are just treating them as a framework or a bunch of toolboxes. We shall see in this episode how extra dimensions, gravity, and space-time are related to consciousness, or conscious beings. Now we shall see another conclusive evidence why string theory is a theory of consciousness based on Yogacara Buddhism and how deep consciousness is. But let us first listen to what string theorists have to say about extra dimensions, spacetime, and gravity. Let us now listen to David Gross. He said, "String theory dictates what kind of spacetime and number of extra dimensions we are going to live in."
String theory was that in string theory there's much less arbitrariness. One of the great features that attracted many of us to string theory was that you don't have the freedom to decide what kind of space-time you're going to live in. That's dictated, and it turned out to be more than 3 spatial dimensions in many solutions within this framework. So that's how.
Next, let us listen to Herman Verland, who is a professor of physics at the Princeton University. He said gravity is sort of inevitable.
At least one of the reasons why we're now more and more convinced that the holographic principle is really something that works comes indeed from string theory, which is my field. And what happens there is precisely if you go through this step of looking more and more detailed at what happens on shorter and shorter distances, you might be interested in say, what happens inside of our nucleus, inside of our atoms, and there's a nucleus and there are quarks and there are smaller and smaller particles. And suppose again that for a moment you would want to forget about gravity, but you start looking more carefully at what we're made of. And then because of this idea that when you start looking at smaller and smaller scales, or at least at smaller and smaller distances, suddenly you discover that there's actually something new happening. And that something new, at least in terms of your equations, you recognize it as gravity. So the amazing thing is that while you're actually interested in just looking at the smallest constituents of matter, without putting gravity in, gravity comes out as something that's sort of inevitable. And to me, there's an enormously deep lesson there that.
Now, let us listen to Clifford Johnson. He echoes the remark of Herman Verland, where he said, "String theory must work in 10 dimension and we didn't ask for gravity, but gravity has to be there."
Interesting mathematical game. String theory was the first time where we wrote down a theory and we said we want it to live in a certain number of dimensions and these strings have to move around and they must obey the rules that we already know nature likes, which is that it has to be relativistic and quantum mechanical. And you put those two ingredients in, and the theory comes back and it gives you a list of demands. And theories didn't do that before. It comes back and it says, I'm not going to work unless you work in, in the version that's most well understood, unless you work in 10 dimensions and unless you describe gravity. So we put that in. We didn't ask for it to be in a fixed number of dimensions. And we didn't ask for gravity. It came back and told us gravity has to be in the game, and you have to have a different number of dimensions than you thought. And that was just historically, and even at the time, was really shocking.
Without mass, matter, or energy, the questions are then, first, why extra dimensions and gravity are dictated in string theory? Second, how space-time is emergent as a result. This means both gravity and space-time don't come from mass, matter, nor energy. The reason is first, it has to do with the suchness nature of laws in Yogacara Buddhism. There is no one inventing these laws, as nature is as such. This is different from the laws of physics which are invented with equation and mathematics. For example, in quantum mechanics, up to 19 constants of nature need to be measured and input into the standard model. But in nature, no body measures and inputs these constants. Just like these constants come automatically in string theory, that is also why even without asking for them extra dimensions and gravity appear automatically. So, what is gravity? Our understanding of gravity has evolved and changed dramatically. To Newton, it is the law of universal gravitation in the presence of mass. For Einstein, gravity is not necessarily a force but warping of space-time fabric in the presence of matter and energy. But string theory destroys the above concepts completely, as without presence of mass, matter, or energy, gravity is required. In other words, gravity exists independently even without mass, matter, or energy. So what is gravity? Strings in Yogacara Buddhism are seeds. Seeds are also called seeds of direct causes. These direct causes are said to be causes leading to Bhumi of existence. Bhumi, in Sanskrit, simply means place, and because there are 9 of them, it is about relative places. We shall talk a lot deeper about causes and conditions in Yogacara Buddhism in later episodes. In Yogacara Buddhism, there are a total of 9 Bhumi or grounds in the 3 realms. It is an extremely important concept of Buddhism, as any worldly existence has to be in one of these 9 Bhumi. As mentioned in the first episode, the further up, in the table, the higher are the realm or, as described here, Bhumi. For example, the conscious beings at the Bhumi of neither perception nor non-perception, which is one of the 4 types of Arupalika beings, are constantly in the state of meditating the spaces at the margin. Therefore, their seeds, or strings, will exhibit the characteristics of expansion of spaces. Similarly, as a desire being on the lowest scale, seeds, or string of human beings and animals exhibit gravitational characteristic that are dependent on Earth, which is a planet. Each of the 9 Bhumi, therefore, has very different space-time or warping of space-time, and hence relativistic. It is exactly what David Gross said, it dictates what kind of space-time we live in. Therefore, gravity is not about law of universal gravitation in the presence of mass. It is also not about warping of space-time in the presence of matter or energy. It is about causes, or about seeds or strings, leading to the phenomena of gravity, which is a fruits, leading to a relativistic existence in one of the 9 Bhumi. As explained briefly in the second episode, science today focuses only on phenomena, or what Buddhism calls fruits, whereas Buddhism focuses mainly on the ontological layer and what are called causes or hidden causes. These causes are everything or the most important in any form of existence, and hence it, or the result of it, which is gravity, can exist even without the presence of mass, matter, and energy. Our understanding of gravity, 100 years ago, changed drastically from simply a force used for measuring movements of objects in the universe to warping of space-time. General relativity, with its characteristic of locality, is also about observer-dependent. Though by definition a machine, without a conscious being, can also perform an observation, but we shall see in later episodes, these strings, or seeds, are very different from a conscious being's seeds or string. The formal are seeds of superior fruits or E8 by E8 heterotic strings, whereas the later are from seeds of same order, which is type 2b strings. This is one of the many reasons why there are 5 versions of superstrings, which Clifford Johnson said, sometime one tool is used, sometime another tool is used.
Hence, it is exactly like what is stated in verses delineating the 8 consciousness. The 3 realms with their 9 grounds come into being in accord with the power of karma. In Chinese, 80规矩颂中的芥蒂随他业力生. Therefore, gravity is about causes or the results of karma.